Panzerstorm, in my opinion, is the worst map in the history of the Battlefield franchise, and it's not even close. Yes, it's worse than Galatia. Yes, it's worse than like saying damn. Now, right there, people might disagree with me, or maybe you are getting on the video to tell me how wrong I am, but before you do that, hear me out a little bit. Now, I automatically know that there are some people that are just not going to agree with me, and that's okay. Not everybody has the same opinion, but what I'm going to do today is take a critical look at the map design and how the map plays, and ultimately explain why I have come to the conclusion that I have, that Panzerstorm is one of the worst, if not the worst map in Battlefield history. So, at the very least, even if you end up still disagreeing with me, you can appreciate and understand where I'm coming from, but knowing the internet, that probably won't happen. So if you do end up enjoying the video, make sure that you do drop a like on it and subscribe for more content. So the topic of the video begs the question, what in your mind, Catalyst, makes a good map? Well, to me personally, a good map must have three things: good map flow, replayability, and gameplay variety, meaning that it caters to all players' playstyles and preferred classes. Now, to start everything off, I must mention that I am an infantry player primarily. I do not fly, I do not tank often at all. I've made my name known in the console competitive scene as an infantry player, so right off the bat, this map was already not for me. But as for all maps in the game, no matter what their focus is, I try to look at the product of the map objectively. Does the map provide quality content? And in my opinion, Panzerstorm fails dramatically on all fronts. And probably one of the more underlining failures of the map is that it was a map that was probably released at the wrong time, a time that really did not make sense when you think about it. Unless you've been living under a rock for the past few months, you've probably heard how dividing a game Battlefield 5 is, not only in its marketing but in its gameplay. And I think that if there's one thing that all players could agree on, it's the fact that Battlefield 5 needs more players. The game has underperformed, and let's be honest, it's going to take a Battlefield 4-esque miracle for this game to recover from the gigantic hole that it's been dug into. And the first content and update patch is always going to be a huge factor into how the game will perform early on in terms of bringing in new players and slow down the churning of players that already have the game and are getting bored of the experience. And in order to bring in a wide range of players, you would think that DICE would want to release a map that caters to as many different types of players as possible, right? So what does DICE do? They release a tank map that caters to a demographic of players that may make up 10% of the total player base at best. See, there are three types of players generally for Battlefield: vehicle players, infantry players, and a combination of the two. I think it would be a fair statement to say that a very large part of the community as a whole probably falls under the category of an infantry player, somebody who isn't opposed to tanks but would much rather play infantry. It doesn't make any sense to me why DICE would release a map that is not only extremely divisive in the fact that it's a tank-heavy map and people already won't enjoy it, that in itself makes it love-hate, but it also doesn't make sense to me why DICE would release a map that in past titles would come in its own vehicular DLC pack later on in the life cycle. Now, obviously DICE has done away with the paid DLC for Battlefield 5, and that's great, but that doesn't make the decision to release this map now any less confusing. In my mind, I would want to release the best map that you had in development to the player base, the best map on all fronts, flying, tanks, and infantry, in hopes of drawing in more players, not a map that's going to divide the player base. Okay, so what about the actual map itself? Why is it so bad? Well, it was advertised as a vehicle-based map that also supports infantry play. Well, the reality is that it should have been advertised with the slogan, "I hope you like getting base raped by 7 tanks on your infantry flags," but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with the first of the parameters of what makes up a good map, and that is map flow, and unfortunately, Panzerstorm doesn't really seem to have any. Taking a look at the map breakdown here, we see the location of every flag and the geography of the map, and we see a total of 7 flags, 4 of which are on the outskirts of the map as spawn points, and 3 points in the very middle of the map where it all comes crashing together like a car manufacturer safety test. Now, the map was advertised, as I said, as a tank-heavy map that had some pockets of infantry gameplay, which in of itself does sound fun, but Unfortunately, like a lot of Battlefield 5, how the developers envision the map playing is not duplicated when it actually gets into players' hands. The map's biggest and most insulting issue is that it has an apparent lack of understanding of what fun actually is. Now, of course, fun is subjective, but what the developers were hoping for was that you get to hop in one of the tanks for a little while, blow some stuff up, and have a good, mindless time without thinking too much about it. But they didn't stop to think about what you would be doing the other 90% of the match that you aren't in some sort of vehicle. The map is designed in such a way that you almost need to be in a tank to have any sort of fun, because if you don't have a vehicle on the map, you're in for a really rough time. As an infantry player, you are confined to essentially 3 flags, the C, D, and E flags. These are the flags that are advertised as quote-unquote infantry player friendly, seeing as they are close together, and these three flags have the most cover on the map. So it's a fair bet to say that since a large majority of the player base as a whole across the entire game play primarily infantry, the majority of the lobby will end up at these 3 flags. I know that, you know that, and most importantly, every tanker on the enemy team knows that. So what ends up happening is that everybody and their mother decides to go to the C, D, and E flags, but mostly the D flag. Infantry players are there because that's the only reasonable place that they can go and actually have some fun and action on the map, and the 7 tanks per side go there because that's where all the kills are. So the map just becomes a gigantic clusterfuck of epic proportions, except it's not epic or immersive, it's goddamn annoying. You have the majority of the lobby on 3 flags, and you have 7 tanks per side that can sit up on the wide open hills of the map and just rain shells on those 3 flags and each other without batting an eye. And this gets worse as the map progresses, because by the halfway point in the map, the entirety of all 3 points are completely destroyed except for some random fortifications that some brave support managed to build up in the meantime. And this makes the map more exposed than it already was. I mean, think about that for a second. If you were even lucky enough to survive the mass amount of infantry playing Ring Around the Rosie with one another on the 3 middle flags, you also have to survive the multitude of tanks that are surrounding and suffocating the objective area and are extremely strong in the game already, as they should be. They are tanks after all. The machine gun in the tank can melt you within seconds if the gunner is accurate enough, and he or she doesn't even need to get close to do it. Okay, so what if you don't go to those flags then? Well, even if you wanted to go to the other flags on the outskirts of the map, the A, B, F, and G flags, these flags are so far apart that you waste a considerable amount of time running to those flags. You just have to recapture them as soon as you leave, making this map turn into a real running simulator if you choose to go for those flags, and that's extremely boring, about as boring as the actual design of the objective areas themselves. But Catalyst, you get transport vehicles and cars that you can use to drive to those objectives so you don't waste as much time. And while yes, that's true, there aren't always cars available for you to take, especially because people take those transport vehicles, abandon them, and then they have to self-destruct and respawn, leaving you often without any vehicles whatsoever, and you having to become a marathon runner just to get to the next objective. And to be quite honest, using a transport vehicle doesn't eliminate the boring monotony of going back and forth between some flags over and over and over again. So with that being said, players tend to stick to the middle flags, which, as I already covered, divulges into little more than a clusterfuck of tank and infantry that is extremely frustrating to take part in. This map is the extreme example of a lose-lose situation no matter how you play it. And that factors into the next aspect of what makes up a good map, and that is replayability. There are some maps that you can play 100 times over and not get bored. Those maps in this game like Devastation, Rotterdam, Aerodrome, Prigel 652, but there are also maps like Twisted Steel, Eris, and yes, your friendly neighborhood Panzerstorm that get boring extremely quickly and have very little replay value. Now, I'm sorry if I just insulted your favorite map. I'm mostly here to take a gigantic crap on Panzerstorm, but one thing that all these maps have in common is that the map on Conquest, the game mode, generally revolves around 2 to 3 flags. On Twisted Steel, it's the B and E flags on the bridge. On Eris, it's the 2 town points, B and E. And on Panzerstorm, it's the 3 objectives in the middle of the map, as we've already talked about. You can only go in circles around these 3 points so many times before you start to get bored with the map, and especially with how much the map lacks in fun and map flow to begin with, as we've already discussed, the boredom that this map creates does nothing but worsen the experience of the entire game. And speaking of worsening the experience, let's talk about the final quality of a good map, one that, yet again, Panzerstorm does not have. and that's gameplay variety. And on a grand scale, yes, you could say that the map does have variety. You can be a pilot, or infantry, or tank player, but for me, variety doesn't stop there. The best gameplay variety is one in which every player has an equal amount of opportunity to play their preferred class and their preferred playstyle, and that's something that Panzerstorm does not offer very much of in terms of opportunity. We've already discussed the advantages that tanks get, being that it's already a tank map, but what about infantry? Well, since the map is already extremely large, and considering that the medic class is comprised of mostly underpowered CQC SMGs, the medic class is going to have a hard time playing on this map, which is extremely unfortunate because the medic class is the most important class in the game. So, sorry, if you get shot and killed on this map, you better hope that your squad is around, because if not, you aren't getting back up, and that could be frustrating for a lot of players. Now, this wouldn't be a problem if the game had semi-auto rifles like the medic class did in Battlefield 1, but the design choice was for small SMGs, so you're kind of out of a medic on this map. But as far as the other classes are concerned, you'll typically find two things: bipod and mounted machine guns, and assault players with DMRs, which tend to dominate this map, which on the one hand is probably the only good thing about this map. A map with a lot of tanks needs a lot of assaults to counter them. Unfortunately, the assault teammates that I tend to get on my team have the IQ of a squirrel, but that's not important. Still, the class imbalance is a major problem of the map, since most players will elect to play assault with a DMR of some kind, since the full auto rifles are at a severe disadvantage on a map like this. The DMRs are probably some of the strongest in the entire game anyways, and especially on a map like this. There aren't too many weapons that are going to be able to beat them. The only other weapon type that can realistically compete with them, you guessed it, is bipoded mounted machine guns and a sniper rifle if they are able to hit their headshots. But the class disparity between the classes is limited to DMRs and bipoded machine guns, and it's horrible gameplay, and that unfortunately is what plagues the infantry side of gameplay on the map, and that of itself is bad gameplay loop. All of the maps, infantry players running back and forth between 2 or 3 flags, getting picked off by DMRs, or running into bipods, hiding in bushes if you haven't already gotten picked off by a tank. All in all, I think at the end of the day, Panzerstorm is a bad map. That much I think you can see, but I also think that it suffers from being released at a bad time and not in a state of good balance. What I would have preferred is that DICE has delayed this map until another Ties of War, but I understand that they wanted to keep it in line with the last Tiger War story. But with that being said, I feel like the map sticks out like a sore thumb, and not only is it atrocious to play, but in my time as a Battlefield player, it is the only map that I actively try to avoid at all costs because it genuinely worsens the game experience for me overall. It is a map that DICE envisioned as being epic, but all it has turned into be is frustrating. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, make sure that you do drop a like on it. Subscribe if you're new. If you are already subscribed, make sure you turn on post notifications so you don't miss an upload. Thank you so much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nick, or Catalyst, and I will see you all another time.